funny thing about addiction is that it's a really subtle and insidious condition, right? Where I would draw these lines in the sand for myself, and I believed that I would never cross them. And I had no intention of ever crossing them. And then I would look back and find myself across that line with a very good, reasonable explanation for how it happened. But there had been no resistance when it came to actually crossing the line. For me, that trajectory looked like going from smoking weed to, well, I would never use hard drugs, but I'll just try ecstasy. That's different for X, Y, and Z reasons. And then I was like, well, I'll never use hard drugs, but I'll just try cocaine, and that's different for these reasons. And I'll never use hard drugs, but I'll just try heroin one time because that's not, yeah, I'm just smoking it, right? And like real drug addicts don't smoke heroin.
All right, Howard. Well, thanks for doing this. Well, I guess I just said your name, but what is your name?
Howard Barker.
The first question I have for you, Howard, is what is addiction?
Oh, that's a doozy for a first question. What is addiction? Well, for me, it's this constant sense of one thing that feels good is never enough, right? It's a lack of moderation. It's a lack of the ability to control my usage of really anything. I think most commonly in my own experience, it's in the context of drugs and alcohol, but there's a lot more to addiction in the sense that I'm always looking for something outside of myself to kind of make me feel better and to give me a feeling in general. That's kind of my base mode of operating, is just searching for something outside of myself to feel better, and then consuming as much of that as possible, whether that be drugs and alcohol, whether that be food, whether that be sex, whether that be gambling, whether that be anything that I can grab onto and cause a chemical change in my body with.
And yeah, let's just kind of get into your story. How'd you arrive where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So, growing up, I had a really good childhood. Neither of my parents have addiction issues. Definitely have a lot of addiction in my extended family, but both my parents are as normal as can be. My dad was in the military, served in the armed forces, and so he moved around quite a bit, never lived in one place more than a couple of years. And my mom was a school teacher, both really good folks. So I don't really have any trauma that I can blame my addiction on. In my case, I have no excuses, right, to attach my addiction to. Time went on, and I just remember distinctly feeling from a really young age, like I was on the outside looking in. Like I remember feeling acutely aware of the fact that I could not connect to you, right? You were separate from me, and as much as I wanted, and I desperately wanted to connect with you, you were not. There was this gap between us, and for a long time, I blamed it on moving so much. I would see, especially as a kid, oh, these other kids I'm hanging out with, they've grown up together. Their parents have been friends since they were in diapers, and so they played sports together and go to school together, and I wasn't, right. We would kind of transplant and move to an area, and I'd go out and make friends, and I'd kind of be the new person in the group, and so on and so forth. And so for a long time, I thought that was the reason. I know now that it's not, but I certainly did everything in my power to try to connect to other people. I wore a lot of different masks. I put on a lot of different personas. And I really tried to be who I thought that other people wanted me to be in order to be accepted and in order to be a part of. But it never quite worked. And being in my situation, moving around a lot was great, because what would inevitably happen is I would go somewhere, and after about 2 years, whatever lies I had spun or whatever persona I had put on would fall apart, and I would burn the bridges, and I would do something to burn somebody or cause a ruckus and cause problems, and then I would move. So it was kind of perfect for like this young blossoming alcoholic that I was. I think the first time I tried drinking, I was in maybe eighth grade, didn't really stick. Tried to get my hands on drugs a couple of times. I got fake drugs by my friend's older brother when I was in like eighth or ninth grade. Got caught with them, or I got caught shortly afterwards, but I didn't really have any like profound experiences. We talk about like the sense of ease and comfort that comes at once with the first drink. And I did have that experience when I must have been 15 or 16, I think 16 years old. And for me, it happened with cannabis for the first time, right? The first time that I smoked weed and really got high. And I remember just that voice that was always going in my head and chattering and second guessing everything. What are they thinking about me? What is she thinking about me? Did I say the right thing? Do I look the right way? Am I da 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 da? Just that constant chatter, right? That dominated my every thought. I remember getting high and not going away. I remember they were smoking a blunt with a couple of my buddies. And I remember the music that was playing, and it was just like, oh my God, this is it. That voice inside of my head, it quieted down, and that constant sense of being separate from went away. It was like, okay, this is it. I was never given this secret like manual to life, and this is what was missing. And as long as I can hold on to this for the rest of my life, I'm gonna be okay. And at that stage of my life, if you would have asked me what I thought about hard drugs, if you would have asked me what I thought about like an alcoholic, if you would have asked me about, I would have been like, that's gross. I smoke weed. It's natural. Maybe some mushrooms here and there, something like that. It's natural. And I'm very into like spiritual exploration. Right. And that was kind of the narrative that I was attached to. I was smoking weed and beginning to get into some trouble with my family, beginning to get into some kind of like legal altercations, very minor, nothing that stuck. But what started happening is as my use progressed, my world started getting smaller and smaller. And I got into some trouble with my family, and essentially they kind of made it conditional that I held it together in order to, leave their house and go off to college with them footing the bill. So I got my stuff together and then went off to college. Things quickly fell apart, right? All of a sudden, the accountability of mom and dad being there was gone. All of a sudden, I could drink and use the way that I really wanted to. And it took about 4 years for the wheels to come off for me. But I mean, the wheels fell off way before 4 years. It took about 4 years after the wheels came off for it to really crash and burn and change. But what happened is my use progressed, my drinking progressed, and I got into a situation where I was, using really heavy drugs on a daily basis. I began using intravenous drugs, and my life, became really just a series of waking up, scoring what I needed to score, get high and get well, and then going to the next thing. And that lasted for a while. I got into increasingly serious legal trouble. I was going to school at UCSB and just kind of went down a rabbit hole that was really dark, and I couldn't climb out of it. I didn't recognize the person looking back at me in the mirror. I was 22 years old. My utilities had been turned off. I was being evicted. My family wasn't speaking to me. And I was just in a really bad way. I mean, like, there was nothing but wreckage around me, right? I burned everything to the ground. I got fired from every job I had. The last, shitty warehouse job I had, I was nodding off at my desk, packing envelopes, and my boss like recorded me doing it and let me go. And I tried to argue with him, just talk about incomprehensible demoralization. He was just like, dude, look at this. This is you. Like, what do you want from me? Like, you're literally falling asleep at work. You're obviously high out of your mind. I was constantly needing to leave to go deal with like court situations in my life, which there was just nothing left. Right. And so I found myself, I was very, very sick, withdrawing really, really badly. It wasn't the first time, but it was a particularly bleak episode. And my mom reached out to me and she said, hey, are you willing to go get some help? And I said, even in spite of all that, I didn't think I had a problem. I was convinced that I was a victim of circumstance. I was convinced that everyone was out to get me, that if my jobs had let me go unfairly, that I was being unfairly targeted by the police, that the school that had thrown me out, that was unfair. I just had a long list of grievances with the world. But I said, sure, I didn't have any better options. I went into a detox down in San Diego that was, this is almost 12 years ago. It was essentially a psych ward that also had like a detox unit on it. So I went into this spot, was uncomfortable for about 5 days, but something kind of gave when I was in there. Still to this day, I couldn't explain it as anything other than, something outside of myself, a power greater than myself. But I just stopped fighting when I landed there, and I had no intention of doing that. And I did not think I was done, right? When I went into that detox, I didn't have this moment of like, I need help, I'm done. It wasn't like that at all. But I got there and like the chaos ended. And I was like, oh man, like I can take a breath. I didn't realize how exhausted I was. And I kind of continued from there into a recovery home. And so I went to a program called New Life House. And I very quickly got immediately thrown into this community. And so a big part, a recurring theme in my story of coming out on the other end and getting well has been that community. But guys my own age, They were going through the same things that I'd gone through, and they really were there to kind of show me how to live life. It wasn't just about treating my addiction, right? It was really about all the other aspects of life. It was about integrity, and it was about character, and it was about being of service, and it was about honoring yourself, and it was about taking esteemable actions to build self-esteem. It was about being a part of something greater than myself, and being a part of a community and a group of people that had my back. And it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. And I really kind of fell in love with this concept of being connected to a group of people and being a part of something bigger. And so, kind of in spite of myself, I started doing the things that they ask. And I started working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I also started doing things like making my bed. I started doing things like taking care of myself and eating healthy. I'd never been one for exercise. And someone told me, like, if you want to start feeling different, you need to start doing different things. And so I started working out every single day. And really slowly but surely, I started feeling differently. I found myself, around 6 months in, I look back and my life didn't even resemble it. I worked out every day. I was a part of a community. I was being of service to people. I got a real job, and I made a resume, and I went out and put in the footwork. And it was like my life was changing all around me. I found my, slowly or quickly, it felt, 6 months became 12 months, 12 months became 18 months. And, I moved out of this recovery house, and my life kind of like was off to the races. And so, I found myself in a situation where everything around me was changing, and all I had to do was show up for it. I had to show up for it, and I had to put in the work necessary. It was really, really big for me. The little things that mattered were, it wasn't about just taking the drugs and the alcohol away, but it was about making these really fundamental shifts in the way that I treated other people. So it was like every atom of my behavior had to be really rearranged. And that was what allowed me to start changing the way that I felt. Because, it's easy to take drugs and alcohol away from someone, but you take drugs and alcohol away, and if the person remains the same, then it's really hard to stay away from the drugs and the alcohol, at least in my experience. I'm really grateful that I had a group of people around me that weren't afraid to tell me that. They weren't afraid to tell me the truth. They weren't afraid to tiptoe around the fact that the way that I navigated the world and the way that I handled things didn't work very well. I had to suspend disbelief. I had to really find humility. I didn't get here with any degree of humility, but life kind of gifted it to me through a series of events where I had to hit my head against some walls pretty hard. I fortunately had a group of people around me that were willing to kind of hold my hand through it. I've been really fortunate that my whole life is built around recovery. My wife is in long-term recovery. All that friend group, that community that I described, I'm still, to this day, over a decade later, very close with many of those men. I work in the field of recovery. So it's really been an opportunity for me to immerse myself in that. And it's not limiting, right? I'm able to live a rich, full life. But what it's allowed me to do is really just kind of keep what first things first, which is my recovery. I'm very much of the belief and the mindset that if my recovery doesn't come first, everything else is gone. Again, like my health is something that I'm able to take care of now. The way that I eat, the food that I eat is very, very different. I mentioned food being an addiction. I'm one of those people. I absolutely love food. I love sugar, but I've learned, again, to take care of myself and honor the person that I am in different ways. So I believe that exercise keeps me sober. No, but I do believe that it's part of being a well-rounded, person, and that spiritual health means more than just prayer, right? It also means taking care of my body and the things that I do in the external world. So I've been given the tools and the information necessary to make those changes in my life. And then on my part, I've chosen to have consistency with that. I know a lot of people in my years in recovery, where consistency can be difficult. And I relate. Consistency is very, very tough. But I'll tell you, when I look and I see folks that are successful long term versus folks that aren't, I think a lot of it has to do with that. I do a bunch of stuff that, I wake up in the morning and the first thing I do is I take a cold shower, and then I go and I walk my dogs, and so I have like these little routines that for me I have sponsees in the 12-step world, right? I work with those sponsees. I have a sponsor that I work with. So all of those things combined together, it builds this life that is really, really dialed in for me, that I'm very, very comfortable with. And it's not a fear-based thing. I constantly have new experiences, but it's what I know works. And I've been given the ability to kind of determine what works for me through taking risks and through taking direction from other folks. I was given spiritual direction and guidance, right? About forgiveness. I had to go through and forgive a lot of people in my life, and I had to ask for forgiveness from a lot of people. I had to go back and do that and take ownership. And as a result of kind of taking those actions, my life has changed really dramatically. I've got a great life today. I work in recovery. I'm able to work with folks and at least be a part of their process, help kind of shepherd folks into the world of recovery, which feels great. I have a lot of really, really cool things in my life and my community today that are directly as a result of my recovery. It's funny because I think the world, we like to put things in nice little boxes and we like to come up with these universal explanations for everything. And in my experience, things are generally a little bit more complex than that. I have worked with literally probably approaching 1,000 families at this point because I've been doing this for close to a decade professionally now. I've seen everything from really, really horrific, traumatic backgrounds, both parents in prison and out of the foster system, just really extraordinarily terrible abuse, all the way up to, you know, millions and millions of dollars at their disposal, the best schools, the best opportunities, and everything in between. And I guess in my experience, it's just that you can't lump everyone into a nice little box just because it's convenient to come up with an explanation. Do I think that trauma has the ability to exacerbate a predisposition to addiction? Absolutely. Do I think that there's a mental health component that cannot be divorced from substance use? Yeah, for sure. Can I also say that I know people that have no such explanation? Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that neither of their conditions is less relevant than the other. They're both suffering. They both need help. But I certainly think I like the word you use. It's more nuanced. And so I think having the nuance and the ability to recognize that there's different reasons, and perhaps in some cases there's different approaches that are even necessary for those different things is important.
Other than consistency, what would be the number one tip?
Number one tip basically is like getting connected with a community that you want to be a part of that's in line with where you're trying to go. I can tell you that at 22 years old, when I got sober, there was no universe that it was happening if I had not felt a part of something. That community had to be attractive to me. That community had to be conducive to a healthy lifestyle, and that community had to be in line with something that I wanted to be a part of, and that I saw myself being a part of.
How about that voice that comes up and says, I got sober so young. Who knows? Maybe I'm not an addict. Maybe it just took me some time to mature. And now I can probably drink appropriately. I can smoke a joint here and there. How about that voice?
I think that that voice may have been alive until I had about 2 years sober. And then at 2 years sober, I had an experience where I found myself really driven by ego, really driven by fear. I had acquired a lot of stuff externally that I thought was going to fix me, that I believed. I had kind of built this narrative in my head as I was getting sober. Once I get this job and once I get this, that, and da 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 da, I'm going to be okay and I'm going to be happy. And I found myself at like around 2 years sober, and I'd gotten all those things, and I was like deeply unhappy. I hadn't been deeply unhappy for 2 years straight, but I just kind of found myself at 2 years. And I stepped back, and I was like very driven and consumed by fear. That what I was describing initially before getting sober, that like constant thought of what other people were thinking about me, and he like returned. I needed to go deeper into my spiritual work. And at 2 years sober, I was in this workshop and like really trying to like find some answers for why I was so driven by fear. I reworked the 12 steps again. And I just had this really profound experience. I've been really blessed that doesn't come up for me, for the last, 9.5 years since that experience. I'm so very deeply in touch with the fact that I cannot drink or use. Like, now, does that mean it's never looked good? Absolutely not. Does that mean that when I've been in times of emotional duress, I've been stressed out and I just want to escape, that the idea of having a beer and relaxing, smoking a cigar, having a glass of scotch, like, yeah, that sounded great at times. But the lie that I could somehow make that work, the lie that maybe this was just a phase, the lie that it would be different this time if I, and I have smoking a joint, that doesn't even sound attractive to me at this time. It's like, that doesn't even sound like a good time to me. There's no part of me that believes that lie. Now, again, doesn't mean that if I stop doing the things I need to take care of myself, that I couldn't be right back there, right? But it certainly means that I'm under no illusions about it anymore, if that makes sense.
What is sobriety?
But for me, sobriety is defined by a couple of things. First of all, it's defined by abstinence, right? So I'm not drinking, I'm not using drugs. I keep it really clear cut. Does that mean that I am anti psychotropic medication? Not at all. Does that mean that I think that if you go in and get a surgery and you need, painkillers, you shouldn't be able to take them? Not at all. But it certainly means that I'm not seeking out substances to change my perception and the way that I feel, and intentionally to catch a feeling or get high off of them. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that I'm maintaining my spiritual condition. For me, that means living with integrity. That means being someone that adds more to the world than he takes from it. That means being of service to others. That means showing up and being dependable. That means showing up for my family. It means just all of those things that in a less sexy way, I could say, is just being a good person. And I think those two things, I said they're two separate things, but really for me, those two things are very connected, because I can't have one without the other. For me, those things are very much interwoven, where as soon as I lose one, the other one disappears as well, and vice versa. The only other thing I'd like to share, I guess I would say, is I'm just really, really grateful for the opportunity to be in recovery. I feel really blessed that I was given a shot. And for anyone that's kind of like new on this journey or contemplating this journey, give it a chance. That's the biggest thing I could say, is kind of suspend your disbelief and give it a chance, and really do the work. You can't say you give it a chance if you just stop drinking and using for a week and feel like shit. You're gonna feel worse when you first stop drinking and using. Give it an honest chance. Like, do something different. Give it a year, and like really try to make the changes that are suggested to you by other people. You ain't got anything to lose. Drugs and alcohol ain't going anywhere. They're gonna be around, unfortunately or unfortunately, for a long time.
Hi, I'm Kenny Hill with Recovery Hill. My intention here is to show the diversity of sobriety. How one finds themselves clawing from bottom is as nuanced as their journey to bottom. And their situation and recovery has the potential to be highly relatable to somebody who is watching. Therefore, I offer the interviewees to have total freedom to express whatever has worked for them, whatever has helped them sustain sobriety. That said, here at the end of the interview, I want to make a quick request so that it wasn't to take away from the interview itself. This request is that you like and share the video. You can subscribe if you want, that's up to you, but at least like and share it so that the content can get to as many people as possible. There is a great capacity and potential for the story you just watched to be able to help out somebody else to begin their story of recovery.